My name is Michelle Rizzoli, and I'm the tech support person for this workshop. But Deb has made it very easy for me. And so you can look in your chat. I'm going to upload a file very shortly. Um, and you will, a PDF that kind of goes along with this, but you don't have to follow along. Is that right, Deb? You can
I
refer
think
to
it's great to have afterwards, right?
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So don't worry about it too much, and it will also be on Huva. You can go in and download it for your reference. I need to tell you that this session is being recorded, so you want to be mindful of that in muting your video if you aren't comfortable. And at the end, we're going to end, about 5 minutes before the hour so that we will all have a chance to evaluate this workshop. And I would really recommend that you do that because it helps for planning next year. If you forget to do it here, you can do it on Huva later on. And so this workshop is called The Flame, Your Story, Your Voice. And I will let Deb introduce herself. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Michelle, for the support and bringing your sister. I think that's lovely. When you bring your family, that shows great support. So thanks, Jenny, for being here too. I'm Deb
Technically, she
Williams.
brought me.
I'm Deb Williams, and I am right now lucky to be living on the unceded and stolen lands of the Squamish and Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh people, who are the storytellers of this part of the world that is right now being called Vancouver. But I am very aware that stories have been told on this land a long time before my family ever got here. So that's what I'd like to start with. I am an actor by profession, a playwright, and a storyteller because 30 years ago, a group of friends who were in theater and, sort of fairly well established women in theater, we all had kids about the same time, and suddenly we didn't have work. Suddenly there was hardly anybody who wanted to employ us because what would we do with the kids? All those kind of things that I'm sure many of you experienced because things have changed now for the next generation. So we created a show. It was supposed to be a play, but we never really got down to writing a play. We told a bunch of stories about our week and how devastated we were and how no one had really explained what was going to happen. I thought I was going to have a couple of little sort of add-on, like with kids were going to be like a necklace, just a little added bit of jewelry, and I was going to carry on with my life. So that didn't happen. And we ended up telling stories at a Women in View festival, which is a now defunct women in theater festival. And we told our stories, and after the first hour, the whole audience stood up and sort of flooded onto the stage and thanked us, and we were confused but delighted. Apparently people were not talking about this in as an overt way that we were. So the last 30 years has been as a storytelling workshop. There's 5 plays. The show has been, it's still playing around the world. We like to say that our children get yelled at around the world every night. We've got 19, it's been in 19 countries, 14 languages. So we knew we hit a chord of some sort, that there was a universality to the stories that we told. And since then, we've written another 4 plays. So this is where I learned to tell stories, which was on stage, making mistakes and just sensing what an audience is taking in, what they want to hear, what they don't want to hear, what works, what doesn't. The work I started with, I thought I was writing poems of deep significance, deep feelings about being a depressed mother, and people would laugh and laugh. So I learned that I was a comedian, and I became a comedian. by learning how serious a comedian actually is. It's just the ludicrousness of the human condition that creates comedy. So over about 15 years ago, I got really bored of just hearing stories from parents and about kids and their struggles. And I invited a few people over from the theater community here in Vancouver, gave them wine and cheese, because I can get an actor to do anything with wine and cheese, asked them to bring their stories. And they were terrified, but they told their stories. And when they left, they said, oh, we got to do this again. So for the last 15 years, we've been doing The Flame. And up until the advent of COVID, we did it once a month around the corner from here in a spoken word venue, 100 people, sold out once a month, all year round. And so the last few years had to sort of change. I do more online, but I'm back out teaching and really don't care about being on stage. My joy is finding space for other people to tell their stories. And if I can make it easier for them and make them look fantastic and get them to trust me that they are going to be okay, they're going to live through this thing, they can tell their stories. So what I've created over the last 15 years is just sort of all the things that I did wrong. How can you avoid making a fool of yourself in front of other people while using your own life as the center point for storytelling? I do believe that I'm a bit born again about storytelling. I do believe that if we told more stories about ourselves, we actually could reach across these ever widening chasms that are being created in our society. Because I've watched over the last 15 years, thousands of people, sort of a weekend at a time, go from being suspect and confused and not, I'm going to come in here and spend some time on the Saturday morning, but I'm not going to get involved with anyone. And by Sunday afternoon and a couple of personal stories, everyone wants to have a sleepover, right? It's just so, it's such, it's obvious and it's human and it works across different nationalities and societies and genders and physical and mental challenges. It's really quite something. And I love it because I just love watching people's eyes turn on and go, oh, I can do this. Oh, I do have something to say. And then someone heard me, someone witnessed me. So yes, I think it's a very church-based thing. And I grew up in the United Church. I believe that this is some of the work that we do well, is supporting people to tell their stories. And I do believe that I brought my children up in the United Church as well, that there's room to listen, and listening is a big part of it. There's not very many of us. There's 9 of us. So I would love us to actually unmute and just lean in and tell me just what you want to be called, and what's your relationship with story and storytelling, and maybe what you might want to learn from me, because I really want to answer everyone's prayers and needs in the next 45 minutes. I'm going to try and do it. Who wants to go first? Valerie?
Not really.
You'll feel so much better when you're done.
My storytelling is usually sharing life experiences and reading from the Bible and spending time with kids.
Right.
So,
right. And when you use your own life experiences, how do you tell those stories?
In the first person.
Oh, yeah.
About unusual experiences, not just every day.
Right. Okay. Do you like it?
Yes, teaching tools.
Okay.
But that's I've fallen away recently from the heart of Bible storytelling, mostly because I've been losing my voice and can't. I used to be Billy the Barker, and now I'm Wissy the Weenie. So
Oh, I'm so sorry.
and I can't project like I used to.
Right.
It's getting a smaller group storytelling instead of a larger group.
And getting people to lean into you then, whispering, and I can get
Almost, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for being here. Thank you. Is there anything you want in particular? Was there something that you went, okay, I want to get this from Deb from this class?
No, I'm a comedian by nature, but not
Great.
really. And and I flub often and get criticized for it. So I'm more trepidatious these days.
Okay. Okay. That's good. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. Great. Jan?
Okay. So, well, I love story and I love telling stories and listening to story. And one thing I noticed with my family, we tell stories and it can be the same story we've told over and over when we get together. But one thing I've noticed is that when the generations are together, nobody gets out a phone. They are completely with the story and the storyteller. So there's something about our own voice, our own experience, or our own experience of something, or making it our own, that seems to be something that people lean into and they can relate to, and then they start telling a story, that sort of thing. So, I mean, I love that. I love telling Bible stories, and I just like free form story. But the thing I'd like to hear about today is, so when when you start to tell a story, when I start to tell a story that I'm in or that I know well, is there a way to remember, just a little box or a little format that helps one stay on track and help others track? Because I find I can get so much into my story and I want to pay attention to the people as well and have them relate. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's so easy when you're free forming a story to just go off and get down one tentacle and you realize, oh, you got to get back there. And yeah. And then everyone's falling asleep, right? By the time you figure it out. So these are great. And I think the thing is to know, like, I know thousands of storytellers, and I think maybe I know one, two, maybe two or three people in all those people who are actually good at telling a story off the top of their head and have a beginning, middle, and end, and it's entertaining all the way through. It's just something that not everybody has. I mean, a couple of people are born with it. The rest of us really have to work at it. I have to write out my story probably 30 times before I get it near the stage, right? You don't have to be quite that fastidious, but we all have our hang-ups. But yeah, I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to ask, Jan. We'll talk about that. Great.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, who else? Janet, I can't see everybody. That's the thing.
This is Nancy. I could go.
Okay, great, Nancy. Thank you.
Nice to see you all. I think, like, when I think of who some of my favorite leaders have been in the past, or ministers, or preachers, or whatever, I think they're the great storytellers, right? Because I can really connect meaning to what they're saying. Stories are easy to recall. They sort of fill in the gaps between the theory and the bigger ideas. And so I really love those concrete stories, and I appreciate the creativity in them. And as a minister myself, I'm always looking for ways to engage people every week in sermons and with children. And I'm planning a women's retreat and, all those things that I think stories play a really important role in helping people to tell their own stories. I think think one of my, if I were to ask a question or a challenge for today, it would be about if I am telling stories about myself,
Yep.
I find it's a really fine line. Like I don't like talking about myself. I find it so much easier to tell a story about somebody else or another experience or situation. And how do you do that carefully without making it all about you, right? So I guess that's what I'm always very aware of. Or, when I'll make I'll make a point or try to tell a specific example, but turn it around pretty quick then to something else. So I guess that's where I try and find the balance a little bit. And I've been criticized I don't talk enough about myself, and then people say, "Oh, we don't know anything about you." Well, you do, but maybe just not enough in their perspective. But yeah, where's that happy medium, right? When you're talking about yourself, it's a privileged spot when you have a pulpit and a microphone in front of you every week. So not making it about you too often.
Yeah, and I think that's such a reasonable question. You know that you don't want to be up there and feel like a needy person
Right,
behind there.
right.
You want to be able to own and know what it is that you're saying. Those are great. That's great. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Who else? Ginny?
Well, I'm a longtime lover of stories. Um, in my early years, I remember my father, back in the days of the reel-to-reel recorder, my father recorded a whole bunch of children's stories on there. And I remember lying in bed listening to my dad's soothing voice telling stories. Um, jump ahead by several decades, quite a few decades. I'm a big fan of The Moth, a podcast. I don't know if you're familiar. It's an excellent podcast of people telling their own life experiences live on stage, and they obviously craft their stories, but it's told without they're told without a script. Um, and I sort of pondered, I mean, I consider myself a storyteller within my own family. And I've sort of pondered, would I have the courage or and the ability to tell a story for the moth? So it's just a curiosity I have. I don't know that you can answer it, Deb, unless you have experience with them and know what they look for in their storytellers.
Oh yeah, you could absolutely. You could absolutely. And you just have to be in a city where they're producing it. It's a story, it's more of a story slam where you go and you put your name into a bowl and they pull names out. So you have a chance of getting a story told or not. So you sort of take a chance. What I do is I actually curate an evening because actually don't, and I don't know if this is because I'm a performer already. I want people to be up there and already really comfortable with their stories, not just taking a chance. And then I also really want the audience to be comfortable because the stories that you hear on The Moth or those kinds of podcasts are some of them, right? You don't get to hear all of them that happened in an evening. And I know that some work and some don't. And the feelings are very large when someone is floundering up there. So that's the difference. But absolutely, Ginny, you should go to New York and you should put your name in that bowl. And absolutely, tons of people that I've taught have done the flame or done the moth. Yeah. All sorts of different parts in the world too. Yeah. So, just getting a story that you're super comfortable with, also sending it to first person at the Globe and Mail, right? Those are the places where you can share some of your stories, and those are more literary, but they're still your stories, right? So that's a great question. Who else? Who hasn't introduced themselves? You're very quiet group.
So I'm Heidi,
Hi,
and
Heidi.
and I don't necessarily think of myself as storyteller except when it comes to biblical storytelling. In
Right.
my storytelling is not a tradition in my family. We're at least oral. We're readers and writers. So the oral is a bit of a stretch for me, and
Mhm.
I'm still exploring after 25 years of ministry and preaching the difference between written and oral presentation. Because my writing is in a nearly oral style, but it's not, it's not quite the same thing. So, yeah, so I love to tell stories from the Bible. That's something I really enjoy doing. Um, and I do use personal anecdotes in my preaching, but I wouldn't necessarily say that I do storytelling as much other than telling the Bible story. So,
Right.
so I think I have a lot of the same wonderings as other people around that, but balance between personal and not making it all about me. I'm very clear because I think all of us have experienced worship led by people who did make it all about them, and it's just not good. So,
Right.
um,
Oh, right. Because there are people like that. That's so
oh,
interesting.
Oh,
Yeah.
there absolutely are. And people do appreciate the personal, but they don't want it to be so personal that it's uncomfortable or that
Yeah.
it's, you know, um, yeah. So just mulling those kinds of things over and I'd just like to get better at telling stories, period, because it's not my natural milieu. I'm used to writing.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, these are good questions. Absolutely. Um, uh, is there one more Elaine? Did you?
Am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
Okay. I am strictly a biblical storyteller, been doing it for years. And the thing that I like to somehow get people engaged, especially in a small group, is sharing of personal connections to the story.
Right.
And sometimes you've got to start with part of your connection to a story. This reminds me of the same feeling and whatever. But if you have any more tips on how to do that well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. That's good. Okay. Has everybody talked who wants to talk? I see some people with their they're not actually on the screen. So I'm going to assume that
Janet told us in the chat that she's running around getting supper ready for her kids.
oh, that's so nice. Well, we'll do a shout out to Janet. We're with you.
Listening to us.
That's great. Okay. Okay. All right. I am just going to get started with, okay, unmute. And what makes a good story to you? What makes a great story? Just sort of, that's the first thing I like to do with a group of people is get a common language about what a good story includes. So you could just say it out.
Learning.
Learning. Okay. Yeah.
Emotion.
Emotion. Okay.
Maybe a
Curious.
surprise or a plot twist.
Surprise. Those are the
Mhm.
things. There we go. Surprise, plot twist, so that you think it's going one way and it goes a different way. We live in an era of so much story and so many different kinds of storytelling going on. I never thought I'd live to the day when I say we've got good TV. That was not something I thought I would ever see in my life, but there's so many ways of telling stories, and people do it online from their phones, and they do all sorts of interesting different ways of telling stories. So keeping ahead of your audience is, I think, really important. And I'm sure this is, extra important when you're trying to keep people involved on a Sunday morning, right? It's moving forward, staying ahead, not going down the predictable road that everybody knows where you're going. So yes, surprise, plot twists, when I'm teaching storytelling, it's about you. It's about you telling your story. So a lot of this actually will work for however form you use it. But I'm asking you to be the main character. So the stories get told, or at least written down the first time, created with a first person present tense. That takes you right back to where you are during that time. So I am 7 years old. I am 7 years old. I am picking peaches in Summerland. There's asparagus under the flumes, and the smell of I don't know, bees and yarrow. So whatever, when I'm starting to tell a story, I get into the first person present tense. It's hard. It's not easy because you look back on things, and it's an easier way to write it, but it also separates you and your audience from the story. You want to live it as you're telling it. And that's the best way to tell the story. And I think this would really help also, maybe, Heidi, when you're talking about biblical storytelling and getting other people to relate to, I think about it. And when I've done writing for my church, in first person present tense as Mary, or as an angel, or as Elizabeth, you go there, you actually live it as if it was your experience, because memory and imagination are actually in the same point of our same spot in our brain. And certainly what memory and truth in your own stories have completely, the understanding of that has completely changed since I started teaching this, right? What's truth? What's truth? What's memory? Everybody remembers completely different. But these stories are your story. So you're the main character. And then you start painting the setting. The setting is your second character. Where are you? How can you take people right there? How do you take them right to the Jordan River with your toes right in the edge, the dry, those biblical landscapes? Or for you, when you're talking about yourself. So you can take care of your audience and put yourself into your stories by taking care of your audience and making sure you're telling stories that they understand you have control of. I suspect that people who are telling stories that people feel uncomfortable listening to in worship, maybe people weren't just as comfortable with the story as they should be. If you're putting yourself into a story and you're putting yourself into a biblical storytelling, or how you can relate to it, you've got to be really comfortable with that story. If it's about a parent's death, it's about a loss of a friendship, a divorce, any of those big things, you have had to go through it first so that you can take your audience through it so they can feel it, because you don't. If you're feeling your part of the story, your audience isn't. They're just worried for you. Does that make sense to everybody? Is this all like totally old hat? Is this what everybody learns at seminary school? No? Yeah? No? So your story also needs to have high stakes. It has to be important. Why are you telling this? Why are you bothering to bring yourself into this story? Why are you taking up space in a person's life? People are so busy these days. What is it that you why is it important? So the story needs to be important, and you can make it important. There, a lot of those big storytelling moments like divorce or death or those kinds of things, you don't need to add many stakes to that because they are intrinsically high stakes stories. But if they are about the amount, you and your partner argue over making toast in the morning, that can still be important. You just have to really raise the stakes. That toast is important. You're getting out of the house and your spouse is in the way and burning it for the 7th day in a row, right? It's got to have high stakes. Yeah. It's great to have a hook and a button. So you want to start and get your audience. And I talk about audience, I mean, yes, it's a congregation, but it also can be, you know, your child sitting on the other side of a coffee table, or a group of friends around a dinner party. It's all the same, right? We all know storytellers that get going and no one's actually listening. And you don't want to be that person, right? You don't want to be that person. I'm just going like 4,000 miles an hour. I hope this is okay. I'm just trying to get as much in as I can in this time. Storytelling really is about listening. It's about listening to your audience. Is your child bored out of their mind? Is this actually damaging your relationship with your child? Are they, you know, are they not listening? Are you teaching and preaching and so everybody's shut down? People are smart. People are smart. Your congregations are smart. They don't need to be told what to take out of a story. They know what to take out of a story. What did you take out of that story? And letting yourself be fallible, I think, is really important. Just being a fallible. No one really wants to hear a story about how incredibly talented I am. And, you know, I thought I would get the job, then I got the job. And then the thing is that I won an award for the job. Like, who cares? Who cares? This is not, storytelling is not about being a hero. It's about being human. It's about the common, everyday human experience. And that's where people take such solace in storytelling. Everybody really just wants to be let off the hook, right? Everybody just wants to feel a little bit better. And I know that's the reason you go to church, right? I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time with Gary Patterson's church, right? And being there and listening to him just, you know, be a fallible human being and question a lot of things made me feel so much better about getting out there for the rest of the week, you know. So I think these stories are really easily used for your needs as well. So your setting, your character, you are the first person, present tense character. This is happening to you. You need a plot, beginning, middle, and end. Don't wander around. Don't add too much extra. That's for your novel. We always say, save it for your solo album. This is really about entertaining somebody, bringing them in, letting them, allowing them to learn, allowing them to laugh. I think humor is a really important part of storytelling, but I'm a big believer in allowing the ludicrousness of human existence float to the surface so that you are funny. How seriously you take everything that happens to you is what makes it funny. How alone we think we are when 8 billion other people on this earth really are going through the same thing. We are not that unique. The details, I think really details are a very important part of bringing an audience in and towards you. And that is, the more detailed something is, the more universally relatable it is. The less the detail, the more general you make your stories, the more boring they are, right? The more people lean back, they don't really want to listen. So what is your normal? Things, if you're writing a story about being in your own kitchen Jan, unmute yourself there for a minute because you're being so attentive. I got to use you. Just describe to me the room you're in right now. Just three things. Just three things about the room you're in.
Okay, this is my newly renovated den.
Mm.
I have mementos on books on one side and mementos on another side that remind me of people. So I have a heart stone and I have a bowl that's different colors that reminds me of a prayer bowl, and I have a number of cards from people and gifts. So
Great. Perfect. What does it smell like? Give me the smell.
whew, well, it smells like my tea I just had.
Right?
Awesome cup of tea with oat milk. Yes.
Fantastic. So out of all those descriptions, and you would just pick three because that's all we need. Three is a great number when you're entertaining people. You already get a little bit more of a feeling of who Jan is. Oh, she's a memento collector. What does that mean? Oh, she's got oat milk in her tea, right? There's all these things that we'll start building Jan in our own heads because we're making stories up about each other all the time, right? You've already decided who I am, you know, what the rest of my house. I feel like I should blur my background so you can actually see just what a sty it is back there. But you want to know who this person is that you're connecting with, right? That's why I'm so desperate to have you guys unmute and connect, right? I feel alone, so I'm not getting, I'm making my own story, and it's hard to do that in a vacuum, which was why, Zoom is so hard. But I'm trusting everybody's getting involved. So
May I suggest that by unmute, you mean turn the video on?
you can use your video, and you can talk. Like, it'd be great to just have a voice or two out there too, or all of you. You're welcome to ask questions. Everyone's being very Zoom polite, which I so appreciate. But I'm not used to. I'm in theater. I'm not used to polite people at all, really, at all.
All right, I'll keep you guys unmuted, but that is not optimal for sound. But at your request, if anybody wants to unmute, just stay unmuted. And if it becomes a problem, I'll deal with it. Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much, Michelle. Thank you.
Deb, this is Elaine.
Yeah.
For the last 5 minutes or so, everybody on the screen is frozen. So I don't see any animation of anybody, and including myself. I'm moving my hands around and
Yeah,
my
Elaine,
screen is frozen.
That has to do with your own internet connection.
Okay. Well, I'm on an iPad too, so.
Yeah, so you might try just waiting a bit or go out of Zoom and come back in.
It's okay if it's not everybody.
Yeah,
If it's
thanks
just
for
me,
pointing
that's
that
okay.
out. Yeah.
Welcome back, Elaine. Welcome back.
Well, at least you have my voice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we see you moving.
Oh, okay.
See your hands moving, so be careful what you do.
Is this making sense? Are people sort of, useful little bits and pieces of information? Okay, so using all your senses is really important to take people on a multi-sensory trip, wherever you are. What does it taste like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? All of those. And then again, just use sort of patterns of 3. For some reason, 4 is just too many. Okay. So use all 5 of your senses. I know there's so many more senses than 5. And if you can describe them, put them in there. Absolutely. So this is about true stories. The truth. But it's your truth. It's not how your mom remembered it. Certainly not how your children remembered it. I'm so sick of being corrected on my life. So these are your stories, and you use your memory and you use your imagination, and it's the truth, but you make the facts dance, right? You make it interesting for people. You don't confuse facts with the truth. right? And sometimes even just saying the facts is enough, you know, in an intense story. The audience fills in so much of what's happening in a story. We're always putting ourselves between the lines. We really are so self-indulgent, aren't we? We're just so, we want to feel. And I think it's really great to dare to take the audience somewhere they've never been before, take them on a human trip that they've never been on, by really owning your own story and really being very clear and telling a story that's different, something that maybe isn't the one that you've told over and over again and gotten really comfortable with, something new and challenging to you, so it can be engaging to the listener and they can feel your excitement and your nervousness. Those kinds of things are always good. We love to know that it matters to the storyteller, right? And of course, you have to know your audience. Your audience, you all have different churches, you all have different congregations, and what a congregation is willing to hear and not is just such a community thing. I know when I'm putting together an evening of stories for the Flame at the Belfry Theatre in Victoria, it's a very different feel than when I'm putting it together for a downtown Vancouver group. Victoria is a little bit gentler city. The Belfry, it has an older audience. I'll definitely challenge people, but it's just how many challenging pieces can you have in there? So you have to know your audience and where it's safe to tell your story to, because you really want to take your audience on a trip that they feel good about. So yeah, a story is a team project. You are checking in with them all the time. What is happening? Are they listening? Do they understand? Do I have to repeat this? Is Nancy writing this down? No, she's not. Maybe I have to say something more interesting to make sure that she's still there. She's Calgary. She's an hour ahead, so she's starting to get hungry too. So you're just aware of who you're talking to. It's not just a monologue for the sake of spouting. It really is about listening and taking care of your audience. I'd love to just open this up for some questions because it's just got 10 minutes left. I just want to look down here. Dopamines, that's what I was talking about. Storytelling is really, yes, because Jan was talking about how much she loves listening to stories and telling stories. And it really is, it's a great way to get dopamines going in your brain. Questions? Any thoughts?
I have an observation,
Yeah.
Deb. I have the idea that you said about putting yourself in the place with the sights and the sounds and the, being there.
Yeah.
It is also a great approach when telling a biblical story, because often we try to tell it with the words that are in scripture, but somehow if you can imagine yourself in that place or in that context when you're telling it, it becomes more than just words. And it's also a very helpful way to remember the words. Because, like John Epp used to say, you do it like it's a movie in your head, right?
Mm-hmm.
And somehow, even if you're not giving those details as you tell it, I'm talking about biblical storytelling, those details enrich the telling because you're there. Somehow it just seems to make a difference. I don't know, just wanted to add that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's your job to take the audience on that trip and make it a multi-sensory trip, because sometimes scripture is bald, right? Is kind of chunk of words and it has a lot of meaning, but there's, how can you, especially bringing young people in, right, to the church, how do you get people interested in this, right? Any questions or thoughts?
Well, I was just going to add to that. When I tell biblical stories, I figure out where the people are standing or sitting or moving or whatever in relation to me, right? Like, is Jesus on my right or my left?
Great.
And who is Jesus talking to? So in my head, I put myself in position with the other characters in the story, which could also work in your personal story, right? So
Absolutely, because I think having dialogue is a really important thing. These are sort of extra. Once you've got your story really well worked out, using dialogue and having a conversation, whether it's between you and your neighbor who's parked too close to, and then they're talking to you, well, it's not my fault, if you didn't have that big snowman in the way. Well, and all you have to do is turn your head. You don't have to be an actor. You just have to put the person where it is. Make sure one of them's taller than the other. That's that's like inside. That's extra fancy notes. But those things can be really helpful. And dialogue really draws somebody in. The other thing that draws people in is other languages. Like, do you have a different mother tongue? Do you talk to at home in different languages? Do you sing? Especially if you don't. Singing in a story is fantastic to sort of turn that radio on and sing whatever that hit song was in that year, so you can take us right there. It's a really easy way to get people to lean in or re-lean in partway through a story.
Mm-hmm.
People's attention spans are short, so keeping them involved is so important. So whatever your extra skills, do you tap dance? What do you do that you can add to your story so that it's sort of a tour de force? You get people really, really involved.
So I have a question about, so in telling your own story and, say I'm in the story, how do you decide ahead of time why you're telling that story? My guess is what I'm hearing from you is you kind of need to know why you're telling it. Am I understanding that?
Pretty important. I mean, we tell stories for all sorts of reasons, and I think we'd be fooling ourselves if you think that people don't know why you're telling. We are so good at that. We can sort of smell why a person's telling a story as soon as they start, right? You go, oh, wow, they're running for office, right? Or, wow, they really want me to think they're super. Or, oh, they're going to tell me what a victim they are. Yeah, no, so knowing why you're telling that story is important, because, and I would certainly tell you, don't tell stories where you're a victim unless you're just very aware that you are, and that you're referring to that part of a life. Don't tell stories where you're a hero. Yeah, those are things that people can smell right away. But also just knowing that your audience is smarter than you. I think it's so important to remember that you treat your audience as if they are as smart or smarter than you. And if they have to ask a question, you can repeat something. And yeah, do they look confused? Oh, maybe I do have to describe that word better. I think it's really important that the words come out of your mouth comfortably, that you use a vocabulary that you are comfortable with when you are telling stories, opposed to writing. So, a number of you are talking about writing. The difference between telling a story and writing a story is that you write it and it just is more literary, because you complete sentences, because you don't pause for a moment and search for the word. It's when you're telling a story on stage or across the coffee table, you are living it as you go, and you're not worrying about, you're doing it the best way you can. You're doing it and that means, if that means like tiny little sentences or repeating something 4 times, whatever it is that you would never do if you were writing and expecting someone to read it, or you reading it out loud. When you write something and read it, it separates you again from your audience. It separates them from your story. Because you say things like think or believe, or whereas when you're telling a story, don't use those words, because they are. When you are telling a story about yourself in first person present tense, you're telling it and it's happening. And the reason you're terrified because somebody is running up behind you, they must have a knife, they're going to hit, oh, and they're running right by, oh, they have their keys, they're catching a bus. It's telling what's going on in your head at any given moment. And we're we're not very subtle creatures. We love and we hate. Once we've spoken, we go, well, I don't mind that person. But inside our heads, we go, I can't stand, I hate them. Oh, I love them. Okay, we should stay married for a little bit longer. But we're very, very black and white in our heads. Right. And
So
that's
Deb, our time is running out.
Of course it is.
It has run out. You could maybe take a couple of questions, but
Yeah.
is